So welcome, Vitit. We're very excited to have you here. This is your inaugural meeting as part of your mandate. ILGA, the journey for us working to establish this position has been a very interesting one. Our membership came together to get behind the initiative. How was your journey getting to this place? How did you get involved? Why did you apply for this position?
Well, first of all, many thanks to all the great work done by NGOs, including ILGA globally, to support this mandate. My own involvement is slightly coincidental because I'm a sort of intrigued person, sort of enthusiastic about trying things and volunteer for many things. So I started human rights work as a volunteer. In fact, many years ago I was doing cleaning windows for elderly people, and then rural development work, and then I started to write and then to advocate. So that's how it began, and particularly on LGBTI issues or SOGI issues. NGOs asked me for help a while back, and then human rights commissions and so on. So that's how I became involved. So it's sort of an open spirit of responding because I'm inquisitive, I want to learn, I want to share, and then in a certain position you try your best to use the information well to help other people, because we're already very lucky, and so I feel very honored to have the opportunity to help.
That's fantastic. And did you find it rigorous in terms of the process at the UN, the countries, the representatives who interviewed you? Give us a little bit of a sense of what they threw at you.
Well, it's a bit of a funny story because lightheartedly, I actually didn't intend to apply.
Ah, okay.
So it was a karmic decision. Yeah. One had this spirit that there were so many great people, and I'm not one of those great people, but many other great people who were there, who were being interviewed, and whomever was selected, I think, in that listing that we had of tens of people, you would have had someone with a great heart to do the work. And in the way of the world, or the ways of the world, of course the states, the interviewers, chose whom they considered most appropriate. And it was a great pleasure and honor that they chose me, but I do not forget the other much greater people who were around me.
Yeah, it's no secret that there have been some countries that have opposed or, resisted the establishment of the mandate. So how do you feel, what do you think is the root of this oppression that continues to resist, the human rights of LGBTI people?
Well, first of all, I would say that as someone who's helped the UN for many years, I actually respect how states vote, and I don't have a say in how they vote. And I've always tried my very best to link up with states that vote yes and no and abstain. And I think that's very, very important in terms of bridge building, and that's what I will do. I'm here to help build bridges and to interact and to interliaise, and I look forward to it very much, including with the countries that disagree. And secondly, in terms of the mandate itself, of course, the mandate has a whole series of concerns to be raised by the mandate holder, that's me currently, and it invites me to take not only a legal approach in terms of norms and laws and so on, but to be knowledgeable about all the undercurrents in an interdisciplinary manner. In other words, there's a bit of diplomacy involved too, and that's life in the UN, but I've always called it principled diplomacy. I will work on the basis of principles as I liaise with different stakeholders. And those principles are founded on international law, what we call human rights. And that's how we wish to live, and that's why we wish to live, and that's what we will do.
You have an enormous task ahead of you. So what are your specific ideas of areas of focus for the next 30, 60, 90 days, for example? Like, how are you going to really unpack all of these specific issues and areas? I mean, you're hearing from activists here over the course of the next few hours with very serious concerns. And I'm intrigued to try and figure out how you are approaching the responsibility and the weight of having this responsibility?
Well, to me, listening and learning very, very important as initial methodology and beyond. And in doing that, in consulting very broadly with constituencies, particularly LGBTI, but other constituencies like medical sector, law enforcement, government officials and so on, religious personnel. The expectation in terms of what has to be done over the next few months is actually the sort of expectation that other UN special procedures are also invited to take into account. Number one, I have to produce a report by June, which means the draft report by March. So any of us friends who wish to send in information, please do so. And hopefully that will go into the report for June as the first report. Number two, any special procedure, including this independent expert, will also look to country visits to learn from the field, even though he or she's writing about the globe, but we will have country studies to learn. And number three, any procedure like this opens the door to communications. So victims, potential victims can also complain in regard to serious human rights violations. So those are the very logical expectations that I will do my best to fulfill. The mandate is asked to look at multiple forms of violence and discrimination, intersectional issues, as well as aggravated instances. Now, all those mean that we have a multiplicity of concerns, cause and effect, actors, actions, and victims. Classic case, if we're looking at LGBTI issues from this intersectional or multiple linked cause and effect, I have to look not only at LGBTI, but also maybe asylum seekers. Maybe we're talking today about the elderly, senior citizens. You know, what happens when they have to go off to their non-homes in terms of their sexual orientation and gender identity? Indigenous peoples we're talking about. African Americans, Africans, Asians, indigenous minorities. Women, of course, very prominently, children, youth. That is the intersectionality of the issues, which, for me, as cause and effect, invites analysis of both actors, government, non-government, actions in terms of measures, both plus and minus, as well as the affected parties, victims, and steps to the future.
Exactly, and people, differing abilities and disabilities, and the intersectionality of race and, you know, being LGBTI within those populations as well is.
I think that's very important, and it's also a good message that while, of course, we care very deeply about the specifics pertaining to LGBTI, our groups also care about human rights generally. So we reach out, while, of course, there are specifics that concern ourselves. And so we want to build coalitions, not only among ourselves, but others. And for me, as someone who's worked on several human rights issues for many years, I'm always trying to reach out to the less converted. Of course, I love the converted, but my humble task is to reach out to the less converted, and as best I can also to link up with the non-converted, so as to at least convey the message of humanity, a sense of humanity and kindness and consideration on all of us.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, taking on that as well, and because as you said, you've worked on several issues and sometimes in hostile situations as well. And then speaking about intersectionality and how all this and kind of your perspective, your skills, your experience, how do you think your skills and approaches then, you know, are you bringing skills and approaches that can address then hostile situations in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity?
Well, first of all, the mandate holder as a special procedure, in this case, independent expert, is an independent analyst under the UN umbrella. A lot of people don't know that actually I'm not a UN employee. I'm not paid. I get DSA per diem when I travel. But I'm a university teacher in Bangkok, and that's how I earn my keep, and then I help the UN as a volunteer, and it's that voluntary spirit that motivates also a commitment and the deeds that ensue. So it's a pleasure and honor to do that. Secondly, it just so happens that I'm also an analyst. I write my own books, I write reports and so on. So whatever reports you will read from me on this issue, as with the other UN reports I've done, there'll be a certain stamp from me in terms of the flavor of the language, the analysis and so on. And I do my homework. I write the reports, subject to editing, but I write my reports with my ideas. I wrote the speech this morning, and it was my idea to test words. So thirdly, I think very important, not just analysis, but how you convey communications. You can have a report that's actually very non-communicative, UNEs, which is sometimes non-communicative. So the report has to be communicative, and the way that the mandate holder has to orally express himself and interlink with people, I think is very important. So those are the little tools that hopefully I can offer as a volunteer. And I would like to state also that for many of us looking at human rights and working on human rights, this is not paperwork. It is a personal commitment in the most humble sense, and it is a spiritual commitment. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about my spirit of trying to contribute, because I've always been very lucky in my work and in my life, but I feel that as a humble human being, I can do something to help in voluntary terms, and I put my best into it because I feel that we're part of a community, and I want to help build that community, especially when we face, the usual wording that we come across, like, the situation is backtracking, or the space is shrinking. Well, it may be, but not in my spirit. I refuse to be depressed. I will move forward and find the channels where I will help.
Fierce. Vitit, fierce. So, on that though, and being realistic, you are going to face challenges. You are going to face obstacles, and we have seen it leading up to having you here today. How are you going to work to address some of those challenges? Literally, what are you going to do to counter the movement in the opposition to having you represent the LGBTI community globally at the UN? It's a solid group of countries, as we know in our work, that are opposed, and often violently opposed, to our communities. So what is your advice? How do you keep your optimism as we face some of these very difficult challenges?
Thank you, I appreciate that very much. And I want to relay the message that I don't believe in monoliths. I believe that you will find good people everywhere. And my humble task is to link with them. Whether you vote yes or no for me, well, that's it in terms of the state gesture. But underneath, you always find some good people somewhere. And I'm a listener, I'm trying to be a communicator. I will do my best to link up with the no votes, as I've always done in my life, in UN-related terms. And some of them are actually very agreeable people, like all of us. So there's a way of dialoguing with them, and then keeping the door open, and then ensuring that people understand your stand, your objectivity, independence, and the very humble and good intentions that come in terms of trying to help others who are less advantaged than us. So I'm not daunted by the challenge. I'm actually very challenged by the challenges in a constructive, peaceful and rational manner, and I will do my best to pursue that route in a very constructive, dialogue-based manner, open to all, with windows of opportunities with and among all, opening gateways and bridge building to the best of my ability.
So you laid out 5 priorities this morning, very, very clearly. Do you have an order in which you're going to approach each one? Or how are we going to, what can we expect in the coming months?
This morning I did the speech where I put to the community some 5 areas, which were not listed as priorities so much, but were all embracing. That was the word that was used. And I did start off by advocating the need to take stock of these sad criminal laws that criminalize consensual same-sex conduct, as well as affecting transgender people who have cross-dressing. This is nothing new. It's common knowledge for so many years, 70 countries with this, some execute people. So my message was really to emphasize what is already well known and try to call for a humane message. Reform the law. And if you don't reform, don't apply, because it's inhumane. But that's well known almost as advocacy. But I wanted to touch upon other areas which are not necessarily legalese, legalistic or normative so much, but which impact upon how LGBTI people live and are affected. An important issue to me this morning was to raise the issue of the medical sector, scientific sector, as to how they view LGBTI people. So the question of pathology came in. I mean, are LGBTI people seen as in a sort of disorder or suffering from an illness or whatever? Or should we be promoting, as I would promote, an understanding that in human biodiversity, we're all part of that humanity. And you don't have to classify people as ill or whatever. So the issue of depathologization comes in. And we have to dialogue well with the medical and other sectors so that we do it constructively with good options for the future.
With input from the local.
So this is an example of what I was looking at this morning. And third one I was looking at was status recognition, particularly of trans people and intersex people who want to change IDs without surgery, if possible. And sadly, surgery is superimposed in many situations. So that's an issue that was emerging about 10 years ago, but has really come to the fore much more. And of course, the issue of intersex people was not dealt with some 10 years ago when we were talking about all this, doing Dr. Carter principles on sexual orientation and gender identity. At that time, it was more about gays, and even lesbians were referred to less.
That's right.
But for the past 10 years, we've referred much more to bisexual, we've referred to trans, and very increasingly to intersex. So that's another example of how the dialogue is changing and the movement is changing. And then a couple of others I was raising, importantly this morning, what I call cultural inclusion. And I would say gender diverse cultural inclusion, meaning how to invite religions and other very important elements of culture to have the space for gender diversity and to adopt an open approach that is not sanctioning violence or discrimination. And we do have it.
Yes.
And we have to identify faith and interfaith links on this front. And the last one I was highlighting this morning was the educational perspective of what I call empathy. How do you generate a certain empathy inside people from a young age? Empathization through education, which means an invitation to be sort of less fixed on male, female, stricture, only heterosexual type of binary approach, but to accept that humans are diverse. And what's wrong with human diversity? There's great beauty in human diversity because it's the natural state of the world in terms of biodiversity. And letting people live their lives and be as humans. And I think the crunch ultimately is this invitation for us all to move towards a certain sense of compassion, kindness, consideration within ourselves, towards those who are different from ourselves. And that's the whole point of it. We don't actually have to label anything if we have that transcendent commitment, understanding within ourselves as part of that empathy.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I think bringing this back to our movements, and we're and being in ILGA here with us, hopefully you'll see a bit of glimpse of what this movement represents. It's a passionate, vibrant, fierce movement, and we've seen how activists have been achieving successes, but also in different areas, but in some other experiencing difficult situations as well, but at the same time maintaining this positive energy. And what would be if you had to address the movements that you'll be working with as well. What would you say are the ways that people could maintain this positive energy that, in my opinion, could lead to more changes?
Well, any movement, and particularly movement that try to move positively, generate energy and will grow accordingly, and sometimes have to be re-energized. In other words, you must have a sort of common agenda in the pursuit of something higher. We are not ends in ourselves, we are means to an end. And that's why it's interesting that today we were talking about not just LGBTI, but what is the meaning of our work over the next 15 years? And it's also a blessing that the world community has agreed upon in Sustainable Development Goals, a certain commitment over the next 15 years. So if we latch onto that, we have a certain linchpin for our actions and operations, our energy, so as not to be too dispersed elsewhere, but to zoom in on these goals that governments and others have agreed upon. End violence, substantially, is one of those goals, 17 goals, particularly in goal 16. And that pertains to everyone. The caption is leave no one behind. It doesn't say no man, no woman, whatever, no one behind. And that is a sort of transcendent wish, rightly, on the basis of non-discrimination and non-violence. And so I think if we look at ILGA or any other movement, international or national, we must represent hope. We must progress constructively. We must move towards targeting some of the consequences of what we do, and there are global targets that we can work with now. And again, my little inspiration for myself also is that I think the little examples from many of us here, many of you here, there was an intersex person here who was talking about his or her role in municipality as a local leader. All these great positive role models come through to inspire as part of this very focused, longer-term view of what we wish to achieve. So the energy is not dissipated. The energy is maximized through concrete actions based upon hope and constructive next steps. We must represent that, and we do.
That's fantastic. I really, we're wrapping up, but you're a bundle of energy. You absolutely are a firebrand of energy. And, I hope you can sustain the pace over the course of your mandate. And absolutely, we look forward to continuing and strengthening our relationship as ILGA and the ILGA family and the movement to help you in every way that we can to energize the UN and energize the world around LGBTI inclusion.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure and honor. And warm regards, blessings to all friends in the NGO and other sectors. And I feel very humbly that I'm really blessed, and it's a great pleasure and an honor to be able to help a little bit in my very limited capacity. But even there, I do believe that everyone has value added.